Okay, so many of you probably know that the eternal English major in me loves talking about things. Like everything. Quarantine has got me feeling pretty restless, so I thought it might be fun to set up a platform where I can talk about whatever topic I want at length instead of driving my friends crazy with 1 a.m. Twitter threads about whatever musical I'm fixated on at the moment. I really love encouraging discussion and hearing other people's opinions, so it would mean a lot to me if you could comment after watching so I can know your thoughts. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy my first video essay on Cabaret, political apathy, and how the show reflects the rise of fascism. Please note that this video will be discussing subject matter that may be upsetting to some, such as anti-Semitism, Nazism, and genocide. Cabaret is a musical by famous songwriting duo Kander and Ebb, which premiered on Broadway in 1966. It was adapted from the 1951 play I Am a Camera by John Van Druten, which was adapted from Goodbye to Berlin, a novel by Christopher Isherwood. Goodbye to Berlin is a semi-autobiographical account of Berlin in the 1930s, which recounts various personal narratives against a backdrop of the rising Nazi regime. The musical has had enduring success over the decades, spawning revivals, tours, and a movie starring Liza Minnelli as the extravagant and hedonistic nightclub singer Sally Bowles. Cabaret has a unique presentation in that it mostly alternates between scenes of dialogue and songs performed at the Kit Kat Club that reflect the events of the plot. This analysis will primarily be referring to the stage show rather than the film, particularly modern adaptations from 1993 and beyond. This doesn't mean that I am discouraging anyone from watching the movie or ignoring its merits. However, it is a relatively loose adaptation of the show, cuts several songs, and changes many aspects of the plot, so for clarity's sake, it likely won't be brought up too much. Cabaret is notable for having been updated several times throughout the years, and the unique structure of the show allows for a lot of creative freedom from production to production. A televised version of the 1993 London production, directed by Sam Mendes and starring Alan Cumming as the MC, is available to watch on YouTube. A link will be included in the description for anyone who's interested, so please be sure to check that performance out. Feel free to let me know your thoughts on the differences between the movie and various productions, and if you have a favorite interpretation. As previously mentioned, the setting is Berlin in the 1930s, and the Nazi Party is gaining significant traction and political power. A young American writer named Cliff Bradshaw has moved to Berlin in hopes of finding the inspiration to work on a new novel. On the train, he meets a man named Ernst Ludwig who offers him some work as an English tutor and recommends to him a boarding house which is owned by a woman named Fräulein Schneider, who agrees to rent out a room for cheap. After attending a performance at the decadent Kit Kat Club, Cliff meets Sally Bowles, a British singer who is enamored by his American accent. The following day, Sally loses her job at the club and is thrown out by her boyfriend. She convinces Cliff to allow her to live with him. Their living arrangement is unusual, however, they are captivated by one another and optimistic about their new life together. Also living in the boarding house is a good-natured, elderly fruit vendor named Herr Schultz. He is fond of Fräulein Schneider, and the two of them have a flirtatious rapport. He gives her a pineapple, which is considered a rare delicacy at the time, as a show of his fondness for her. Over the next several months, Cliff and Sally fall in love. Cliff knows that he is currently living in an unsustainable dreamlike state, but his life with Sally is too wonderful to resist. And on top of that, she reveals to him that she's pregnant. Though she does not know who the father of the baby is for sure, Cliff believes that it is very likely himself and convinces her to keep the child. Cliff receives a job offer from Ernst, easy money picking up a suitcase in Paris and delivering it to a client in Berlin. While this is happening, Fräulein Schneider is at odds with another boarder at the house, Fräulein Kost, a young woman who frequently brings sailors back to her room, even after she is forbidden from doing so. Fräulein Kost argues that she knows Herr Schultz has been visiting Fräulein Schneider in her room, and Herr Schultz states that it's fine because the two of them are actually going to be married. After Fräulein Kost leaves, he then sincerely proposes to Fräulein Schneider, and she accepts. At their engagement party, Fräulein Kost tells Ernst Ludwig, who is now sporting a Nazi armband, that Herr Schultz is Jewish. Ernst warns Fräulein Schneider that marrying Herr Schultz would be unwise, as he is not truly German in the eyes of the Nazi Party, and he begins to leave. Fräulein Kost stops him and begins singing Tomorrow Belongs to Me, a rousing nationalistic anthem that encompasses the distorted patriotism of the Nazi Party and Germany's impending totalitarian future.
The sun on the meadow is summery warm. The stag in the forest runs free. But gather together to greet the storm. Tomorrow belongs to me. branch of the linden is leafy and green. The Rhine gives its gold to the sea. But somewhere a glory awaits unseen. Tomorrow belongs to me. Hey, sing with me.
The rest of the party guests enthusiastically join as Cliff, Sally, Fräulein Schneider, and Herr Schultz silently observe. In Act 2, Fräulein Schneider is now uneasy and frightened at the idea of marrying Herr Schultz. She cares for him, but she is concerned for her future if the Nazis gain power over the country. Herr Schultz assures her that everything is fine, even as a brick is thrown through the window of his shop in an obvious anti-Semitic attack. Fräulein Schneider cannot shake her fears. She returns the engagement gift she received from Cliff and Sally and tells them that the wedding is off. She is not young or brave, and she cannot fight against the overwhelming influence of the Nazi Party. Cliff has had enough of life in Berlin and doesn't feel that it's a safe place to live any longer. He wishes to take Sally to America so they can raise their child, but she loves life in Berlin too much. Unaffected as she is by the terror of the Nazis, she does not want to leave. Cliff harshly demands that she wake up and actually look at the world around them, but she refuses and states that none of it has anything to do with her or their relationship. Later at the Kit Kat Club, Cliff is approached by Ernst with another delivery job offer, but Cliff refuses, now aware that he has been doing work for the Nazi Party. Ernst speaks disparagingly of Herr Schultz, and they fight. Here, Sally performs the title song of the show. She is resolved to continue to live as she always has, a carefree life of fun, of parties, and of song and dance because life is a cabaret. The next day she reveals to Cliff that she had an abortion. He is devastated but still wants her to leave Germany with him. She refuses, breaking his heart, and asks that he dedicate his novel to her. He leaves, and on the train to Paris, he begins his novel.
There was a cabaret, and there was a master of ceremonies, and there was a city called Berlin in a country called Germany, and it was the end of the world. And I was dancing with Sally Bowles, and we were both fast asleep.
The setting of 1930s Berlin, a time during which Germans had become increasingly disillusioned with mainstream politics and receptive to the ideas of radical nationalists like the Nazi Party, inherently makes Cabaret one of the most political musicals ever written. The Nazi Party had been on the rise since the 1920s, and their grip on the country saw aggressive acceleration in 1930 when they were voted into parliament. This was the result of years of propaganda and vague but hopeful promises of economic prosperity and a resurrection of the glory days of Germany past. Fascism is a word that is brought up very frequently in today's political discourse from all sides, so let's go ahead and get a definition for that. Fascism is defined by Merriam-Webster as a political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. Jason Stanley, author of How Fascism Works, stated in a 2018 interview with Vox, "In the past, fascist politics would focus on the dominant cultural group. The goal is to make them feel like victims, to make them feel like they've lost something, and that the thing they've lost has been taken from them by a specific enemy, usually some minority outgroup or some opposing nation. This is why fascism flourishes in moments of great anxiety, because you can connect that anxiety with fake loss. The story is typically that a once great nation has been destroyed by liberalism or feminism or cultural Marxism or whatever, and you make the dominant group feel angry and resentful about the loss of status and power. Almost every manifestation of fascism mirrors this general narrative." So how do the events and characters in Cabaret reflect this? You have two outsiders to Germany, the American Cliff Bradshaw and the British Sally Bowles. At one point in the show, Sally is looking around Cliff's flat and
Sally,
sees a book.
You've got to understand.
Oh, this is your novel.
But it's in German. Mein Kampf?
It's not my novel. I thought I should learn something about German politics.
She is, of course, referring to Adolf Hitler's 1925 autobiographical manifesto, which outlines his extremist anti-Semitic beliefs and ideas for Germany's future. Cliff is reading Mein Kampf to familiarize himself with German politics. Sally's lack of familiarity here is meant to represent her overall ignorance of the escalating fascism coming to power directly outside of her myopic scope of vision. Cliff and Sally stand as foils to one another. Cliff is observant and politically conscious. Sally believes that politics have nothing to do with her and that everything will always work out in the end. I'm sure many of us will relate to Cliff's plea for Sally to wake up and acknowledge what is going on in the world around them. In light of recent events such as the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, it feels like fighting a constant losing battle when the people around you won't take a stand or even acknowledge the violent subjugation of others due to their race, religion, sexuality, or anything else that sets them apart from the majority. It's easy to understand where Cliff is coming from, and most audience members will see themselves as superior to Sally, recognizing her intentional ignorance and dedication to living a life of indulgent fun. However, the audience isn't Cliff, slowly becoming privy to what is happening to German society. The audience isn't even Sally, intentionally uninformed. The audience is a silent observer and acutely aware of the historical context of the show. Sally doesn't have a reaction to the rise of the Nazi Party as much as she has a complete lack of one. Cliff stands in as the reasonable perspective with which the audience is going to feel most comfortable. The other named characters, Ernst Ludwig, Fräulein Schneider, Fräulein Kost, and Herr Schultz, are a bit more complex. Let's talk about those characters. Perhaps the easiest character to read in the show is Ernst Ludwig. While he starts out as simply Cliff's first acquaintance in Berlin and appears to be a kind and amiable man, in a later scene his jacket is removed and his swastika armband is revealed. Ernst is a Nazi and has been a Nazi this entire time, his political fervor becoming more and more pronounced as the show progresses. He is one who propagates fascism directly, is active within the Nazi Party, and has a particularly vested interest in its future. Despite his introduction as a helpful, likable man and Cliff's first friend in Berlin, he is a violent nationalist who has not only internalized the Nazi Party's ideals, but also works among them to further their ideology and pursuit of political power. I believe that the most important message in the delivery of Ernst's character is that he is a reminder fascists aren't some distant, cartoonishly evil, faceless mass. Sometimes they are the friendly man you meet on the train. So what does that make Fräulein Schneider? She is elderly and explicitly mentions her days spent living through Germany's devastating depression as something to which she never wishes to return. She went from a wealthy woman to a woman of modest means, running a boarding house which is barely profitable for her. Her relationship with Herr Schultz brings her great joy, but she is not willing to continue with their plans for marriage once Ernst warns her of the imminent danger of marrying a Jewish man. She worries for the future, but what is she worried about mostly? Her ability to make a living. She does not appear to be particularly concerned with the safety of Herr Schultz. She is preoccupied with her livelihood and fears backlash from society.
I saw that one can no longer dismiss the Nazis. They are my friends and neighbors, and how many others are there?
Fräulein Schneider does not directly express a belief in fascist ideals. However, she does not explicitly condemn these beliefs, and she knows the best way to distance herself from harm, ending her relationship with Herr Schultz. It is obvious that up until the reality of the increasing Nazi influence on Germany's society dawns on her at the engagement party, she has simply been ignoring the rising nationalism around her and minding her own business. And her biggest priority for her sake is to maintain the status quo. When enough people choose to remain quiet, evil is left to fester. Fräulein Kost is a young woman who appears to be on hard times, and while she plays more of a secondary role in the story, it is an interesting one. She does not initially appear to be particularly politically engaged. However, at the engagement party for Fräulein Schneider and Herr Schultz, she weaponizes her knowledge of Herr Schultz's Judaism and exposes him to Ernst Ludwig out of a desire for petty revenge. She shows her solidarity with Ernst by singing "Tomorrow Belongs to Me," an anthem written by Kander and Ebb for the show, and not an actual nationalist anthem as many may believe. It's a brutally accurate song that channels the ideals and hopes of the Nazi Party and the way they were so enthusiastically accepted by citizens of Germany. She sings with such fervent joy, others join, and the scene turns into a disturbing celebration of the Nazi Party. While Fräulein Kost does not wear an armband, she shows herself to be as dedicated to the Nazi ideology as Ernst Ludwig. The Nazi Party inspires within her hope and confidence in a glorious future for Germany. This is the manifestation of those vague, hopeful promises of fascist regimes that scapegoat a country's woes on a minority group. Fräulein Kost very likely feels that the Nazi Party will improve her life, and she is enraptured by their movement. And what of Herr Schultz? He is a generous, good-natured man who runs a successful fruit shop and happens to be Jewish. This is revealed at the beginning of the show when he wishes for Cliff to have a life of mazel in his new home, luck, or good fortune. What is interesting about Herr Schultz and his role as the one named character who is actually in the most tangible danger under the rise of the Nazi Party is that he is an unwavering optimist. Even when his store is vandalized in an obvious attack on his faith, he tells Fräulein Schneider that it is only some mischievous children and there is nothing to worry about. At the end of the show, when the main characters are brought out on stage to give their final word on the events of the world around them, he maintains his belief that everything is going to pass soon. However, the audience knows already the future that is in store. The only person around Herr Schultz who extended a show of solidarity to him is Cliff, privileged to be able to leave Berlin at a moment's notice, safe from the impending terror of years to come. Herr Schultz is shown no sympathy, no caring, no support by anyone else around him. A sad reality of vulnerable people in a society that will blame them for its troubles. Now let's talk about a couple notable scenes from the show. Perhaps the most controversial is If You Could See Her, a song performed by the MC which is meant to parallel the relationship between Fräulein Schneider and Herr Schultz. The MC is singing about his relationship with a woman represented in the scene as a gorilla in a dress, that society looks down upon. He sings that if only the audience could see her through his eyes for all of her good qualities, her wit, her intelligence, her knowledge of music, they wouldn't be so quick to judge. The song is portrayed as a light-hearted, comical number. However, the MC then hits the audience with the final line.
That if you could see her, so my eyes. She wouldn't look Jewish at all.
This scene has inspired a lot of discussion due to the disturbing revelation at the end. It is meant to highlight how commonplace bigotry is in our society. Here the audience has been laughing at a song about a comically unconventional relationship only to be punched in the gut with the knowledge that this woman they have been accepting as strange or ugly or otherwise worthy of societal disdain is actually simply a Jewish woman. The song didn't always quite land with audiences back during the show's original run, and it inspires debate even to this day. However, the message, while uncomfortable and undeniably menacing, is an important one, and the feelings of discomfort evoked from the audience are the song's message itself. At the end of the show, the MC welcomes the audience once more in a jarring and discordant reprise of Willkommen, which takes the jaunty, playful opening of the show and turns it into an uncomfortable, grating tune to signify what the audience has now silently watched come to fruition. They are now being welcomed to Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler is in power, Nazi rule is law, and millions of lives will be lost. In the most devastating modern adaptations of the show, the MC takes off his overcoat and reveals a concentration camp prisoner's uniform. It is marked with the yellow Star of David and a pink triangle denoting homosexuality. The MC here represents those who will lose their lives in the years to come. Cabaret is a cautionary tale against complacency, against willful ignorance, against lazy acceptance of the status quo, and its purpose is to show the ways in which ignoring radical nationalism can turn a country into a fascist state. Cabaret played the nationalism and Nazism in the show so terrifyingly straight that Kander and Ebb, two Jewish men, were accused of anti-Semitism themselves. The song Tomorrow Belongs to Me, as mentioned before, was written with such authenticity that white nationalists have occasionally co-opted it as one of their anthems, and the show itself has not gone without occasional criticism of being genuine Nazi propaganda. Asawan Suebsang wrote in his piece for the Daily Beast why Cabaret packs a harsh political punch. For all the exuberant song and dance, the most powerful aspect of Cabaret in all its various incarnations is the political wallop that it delivers. At its core, Cabaret is a devastating critique of apathy and a clever and terrifying look at totalitarianism. When you look at the time during which Cabaret was written, the Vietnam War and a mass cultural shift, McCarthyism and a widespread fear of communism, it makes sense that the musical is so resonant during times of political and social strife, because there is always panic, fear, and scapegoating during uncertain times. Cabaret is a unique look at the way in which that fear manifests, and it isn't overnight. It happens gradually. It happens right under our noses, and if we don't say anything, be it out of genuine apathy or out of self-preservation, then it is going to continue happening time and time again, in many different forms, under many different names, and taking many new victims. The aspect of Cabaret that evokes such visceral discomfort in people, what Cabaret does soberingly well, is that it asks the audience to play a role, and that role is of a society that sits back and watches as fascism takes hold of a nation and oppresses, subjugates, brutalizes, and kills religious, racial, political, sexual, and social minorities. It is a show that goes the extra mile to make the audience as uncomfortable as possible, because there is no comfortable way to discuss fascism. I believe the character of Cliff sums it up best when he says, "You're either against it or for it, or you may as well be."